Okay, so has anyone got anything they'd like to share or discuss to start with? Yeah. Hmm.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. For some reason, the camera's not working. It works in the camera setting, but not on Google. It's weird. Um, anyway, yeah, Andra wanted to get on, but I don't know if you've sent her one.
I've sent her an invite as usual. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right. Well, I had a question for you this morning, if nobody else wants to jump in, and that is about the concept of honor. Um, how do you see honor working out as far as how we're supposed to do it? I know there's a lot of talk about honor, but to me, sometimes that seems just a little a reworking of authoritarian type leadership and controlling and stuff like that. And I know out of Bethel, there's a lot of teaching about honor, which is good, but people, uh, yeah. Anyway, just wanted to see what your thoughts were about the
okay.
honor. How do we honor one another, honor other leaders, honor people that we're uh, you know
Yeah.
with and around? Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, in a sense, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of things about honor which are from an old perspective, particularly in the third world. I mean, they elevate leaders to pedestals and you know honor them in a completely wrong way. Um, but there is a right sense of honor, and I believe the culture of honor is about creating an environment where we can be open and honest and transparent with each other. And to be really honoring to someone is to be real. And therefore, when we have our culture of honor amongst our leaders and amongst the people that we're, the church here that we're encouraging to live in that sort of way, we focus on the aspect of recognizing the person and their destiny, and that God's called them, and that they have a right in terms of sonship, and essentially honoring who they are and encouraging them in that to embrace who they are. Now, if we see people who are not embracing who we are, the honorable thing to do is to encourage them to do so, not by ignoring where they're not, but by talking to them about it. So honor really is about communicating the love that we have for each other to each other. So, speaking the truth in love is a form of honor, and that would mean being willing to share with a person if there were things that we saw that they were, let's say, they were speaking negatively. Well, the honorable thing to do would be to actually say, I've noticed that you've been speaking negatively about yourself. Is there anything going on, or is there anything I can do to help? Why is that? So the culture of honor actually enables us to ask questions of each other to bring to the surface those things that are actually not in aligning with who that person is from a godly perspective, but maybe coming out of issues in the soul and various other things. So from that perspective, it's being able to speak the truth in love to help the person come into the fullness of who they are as a son of God. And when they're functioning in their destiny, then we're able to receive from them who they are as part of the body. So we have the concept of the body being a group of people who are gathered around God's purpose with a vision, a blueprint. Then we all have a part to play. Therefore, the body will suffer if every individual person isn't fulfilling their part and destiny. So we want to help that person to do that in such that then we are able all to receive the benefit and blessing of that person's gift. and the fulfillment of who they are in their identity as a son of God. Now, the key in identity is that identity doesn't come through doing things. So although we're obviously looking for a person to outwork who they are, we're not trying to affirm them in their works, we're trying to affirm them in their identity. And therefore we're not looking to try and look for people-pleasing, codependency in relationships and those type of things, where the person is looking to get their ego massaged or their affirmation of who they are because they're striving to do something. So, it's looking to really be open and honest and transparent with one another. When it comes to, honoring leaders, you honor leaders in exactly the same way as you honor everybody else. They have a role and a function to fulfill, and you respect and honor that, and you encourage them in it, and therefore you receive the benefit from that. But you also can speak to leaders like you would speak to anyone else and speak the truth in love and be honest and open and transparent and expect that to be both ways. The position itself is not a position that means that the person cannot be approached in the same way as anybody else. So a leader, let's say we have a bench of 3, that person is foundational, therefore people can build on that person, and that person is there to lift people up to hear God for themselves and to encourage God. That's what the role is. That's the function of the role. The person who's in that role is just like any other person. They have their issues, they have their things that they're maturing, they're growing, they're developing. That person is not going to be perfect. There are going to be things that they're working through in their maturity of who they are, in their identity, which they're going to need people to be able to speak the truth in love to them, just like to anybody else. And ultimately, the true sense of humility is that you recognize who you are and you submit to that yourself. And then when somebody then speaks the truth in love to you, you receive that in that they're honoring you by being open and honest and not fearful, and they're not treating the position as one which they have to give into if they're not in agreement with. There's a whole sense where we have to create an environmental relationship where we are able to talk to one another and share openly and honestly and to discuss issues of understanding and, well, can you explain to me why you do that? Or can you explain to me why is this done this way, without any threat that, well, they are usurping our authority, they're challenging our authority, because we're not over anybody. We're beneath people and foundational for people to build upon the blueprint that we have been given. And our responsibility is to serve that blueprint by serving others. So all leadership must be servant-hearted. And if there's any way that we're trying to get people to serve the leadership position, then we've got it all wrong. Jesus very clearly said that we're not to lord it over people, and that we're not to treat anyone as an earthly father, in a sense of, well, they're the earthly priesthood or any. There is no earthly priesthood. We're all royal priests. We may have different roles and different functions in what we do, but we're all royal priests, and we all have access to heaven without having to be covered by anyone or going through anyone. There is no mediatorial understanding within the new covenant. It is, we are all temples of the Holy Spirit. We're all living under an open heaven, and we all have access through the torn veil to engage God directly ourselves without having to go through anybody else. But everyone's got a role and function within God's kingdom as a son. The Bench of Three's role and function is to help see the blueprint established by releasing and encourage people to fulfill their destiny as living stones within it. And so the blueprint is what they serve. They don't own it. It belongs to God, and their part is to help that blueprint to be established by helping people find their place in it. And again, that doesn't mean that leaders can tell people what place they should need to have within the blueprint. That must be for the person to hear that for themselves and feel, hey, I'm part of the wall here, or I'm part of the window here, or I'm part of the whatever, wherever I'm a living stone. And then when you sort of see Nehemiah and rebuilding the temple and the walls and all those sorts of things, there was a sense where we come to each other's aid when there's an issue, and we can call and say, hey, I'm struggling, without fear that we're going to be in any way rejected, made to feel inferior or belittled because we have a problem. Actually, we rejoice that we are all growing and maturing, and we can be open with our problems and not have to hide them, because we can be real without fear of it being affecting our relationships with people, because we're not looking at each other from a works perspective, but from an identity perspective, and God sees everybody the same as his children, and he loves them irrespective of their works. And we must treat everybody that way as well. And there is, of course, a big danger that you put people on a pedestal. And I've heard, people say, oh, well, Ian's my rabbi, and I follow him, and whatever. And I'm just thinking, actually, no, we're following Jesus. He is the only rabbi that we need. There are some great people who are gifted and have got who they are in their identity to the body, who have been great in fulfilling, releasing revelation, but we must never put them on a pedestal or put them on a view of, well, they are if anything they say must be true. Otherwise, that's a huge danger. I mean, that's how we got into problems with other situations where people gullibly just accepted everything someone was saying because of their previous reputation. Essentially, I wouldn't want anyone accepting anything I say without having the ability to go to God and have the revelation for themselves. And actually, if they haven't the revelation themselves, all they've got is second-hand information. It must become our own personal revelation and testimony by our own engagement with God ourselves in it, not just, or someone's taught this, therefore, wow, this is amazing. Yes, it may be amazing, but it's only going to be the revelatory truth to me if I go and engage it myself and experience it in relationship with God myself. So it's my personal testimony. Otherwise, it's just information. And I would really not like it if what we're doing in encouraging people to hear God creates another tier of priestly structures where people having to go through someone else, whoever they are. It's not that way, and the celebrity status that people get into through the conference circuit and everyone else is a danger. It's a danger for them in that they'll start believing their own press. It's a danger for people in that they are going to more to people than they are to God. Anybody should just be an inspiration for me to go to God. And anything they share should be something that inspires me to go to God for myself, or if I don't resonate with it, to park it and leave it until I do or I don't. Just because someone's come out with the latest revelation, if I don't resonate with it in any way, I just ignore it. And if God inspires me, in my situation, obviously I have a problem that people ask me a lot of questions about things. So sometimes I have to go and find out about things, even though I have no real desire to do it myself. But for the sake of helping others, I will sometimes go and find out, well, okay, what is someone saying about this? And obviously we had the latest one about, the bride of Christ and all that stuff. There's always going to be sort of stuff out there which potentially can cause confusion. And to be honest, if something is causing me confusion, I know the author of that confusion is not God. So I don't let myself get confused. I just ignore it. If there's something which is confusing, it's like, well, okay, either God is going to unveil and give me revelation of it, or I'm just not going to bother. And that's not to say that there are things I don't understand and I'm willing to go to God and ask for understanding and wisdom and insight into things. I do. But if I'm confused over something and I just I don't even see how that is truth, then I'll just leave it. And if God chooses to unveil that in the future, maybe it's not the season that I need to hear that. And maybe that's not the season that God wants me to engage in right now. And I'm not saying that I will for always not be drawn to something, but I might not be now. And if I'm not now, I'm not going to be drawn to it just because some celebrity has said it is the latest thing. Because I want my revelation to come from my relationship with God, not from somebody else. You know. So honor, we should all honor each other rather than the role that we're in. That's the key. If you're honoring something more because they're in a particular role, then you have to look at your own attitude towards them. Because if you're honoring significant others rather than everybody the same, then you're looking for validation from someone because they have a position. If I validated you and someone else validated you and you valued my validation more than somebody else's, then you're the one who's got the issue. That's how it works. If you said something good and it's like, oh yeah, that was great, and I said thank you much, and someone else said the same, I would value it equally the same. If Ian said, oh wow, that was amazing, or someone else, it wouldn't make any difference to me, and it shouldn't make any difference to any of us. But we're in a process that sometimes it does. And if it does, we need to ask ourselves, well, why? Why would that person's opinion matter someone more than someone else? And I'm not saying we don't respect people and respect what they've done, and I honor the whole previous generation who've helped me get to where I am. But I don't honor what they're doing now if they're staying in the wilderness and they're hindering people. That doesn't mean that I don't honor them as people. I can honor someone as a person without actually agreeing with them. Because that's what love does. So yeah, I don't know if that sort of answers some of it, but obviously there's a lot of mixture out there, and a lot of people are in transition. Therefore, we have to be careful in transition that we don't think of what we are now as being the final destination. We're actually on a journey towards something more, and on the journey we have to change from one degree of glory to another and have our minds renewed, and therefore we're not going to see everything right all the time. But if our hearts are, hey, please unveil or reveal to me any hindrances or blockages or any way in which I'm not actually like Jesus or the image that you created me to be, then I want you to change me. Then if we pray those prayers, and if we're engaging in being a living sacrifice, cleansing our gateways and doing those things, should someone come and actually then point out a blind self area that we have, we should not reject it and get defensive over it. A culture of honor removes the defense and offense of a situation and tackles the problem, not the person. And we can all tackle the problem together without it being a personal issue with somebody that gets personal and therefore gets an offensive situation. Now that's easier said than done, and therefore when we react to situations, we have to ask ourselves why. Why did I react that way? Why did I get defensive? Or why did I actually get feel good in that situation? What was it? Is that good or was that not? When I did the whole process of trauma to transformation and looking at my reactions to things as a window to look into what was causing those reactions, I went through this process a lot in being reflective, not navel gazing, but just, okay, why did I react in that situation the way I did? What caused me to feel that in that situation? I felt insecure. Why? What was going on when I was feeling insecure? Was that because there were people there who I felt insecure about, or I wasn't confident, therefore why? Because most of the time we don't evaluate our reactions or emotions in a situation. We just bury them and move on. They can be very helpful in indicating the areas that God is wanting us to work on and be changed and transformed, restored, healed, made whole in. Because if I'm wounded in an area and I reacted to someone out of a wound, then I want to be healed, not to put a plaster on the wound or ignore it and hope it goes away. So it's a good thing to be open to look at our reactions and ask God for insight into them, without being introspective and negative, you know, because most of my reactions are just normal reactions and they're nothing out of the ordinary. It's when something is out of the ordinary that I think, oh, where did that come from? Why? And you can see it in people. You can see when people are defensive. You know, we had it in the other night in the situation I was in. I said something that someone took completely the wrong way. In fact, took the opposite of what I was actually trying to say and became very defensive. But I didn't just leave it. I actually said, that seemed to be really defensive. I don't think you actually understood what I was saying, because I actually was trying to say the opposite to what you seem to infer. But I brought it out into the open, and we then could discuss it, rather than, oh, that person's being defensive, I'd better not go there. And that's the problem. A culture of honor requires two things. It requires our willingness to be vulnerable and open to others, and our willingness to also confront others in love and be willing to go there with somebody because we see something that we're not willing to go there, then we're not willing to honor that person and help them. So you do no one any favors by ignoring someone's bad behavior or an attitude or a mindset or a way of speech that they might have that you find difficult. You know, when people are negative around me, I am very sensitive to negative attitudes and behaviors and words. You know, and when someone's negative with their words, I speak to them and I encourage them, don't be so negative about yourself, because that isn't going to actually bring much change and transformation. If you're down on yourself, start thinking about yourself the way God thinks about you. You know, and that helps, you know, a lot. But most people fear rejection, therefore they're afraid to go there because they feel they're going to be rejected if they speak the truth in love. So they don't go there, and then no one changes. So we all tread on eggshells around each other, or just ignore everything that goes on. That's not reality. You know, a real situation, we can be honest and open and real without it having to get into a offensive and defensive position. And if it does, then you remove one of the positions. You know, and the way to do that is to disarm the situation by asking questions, not pointing the finger. You know. But yeah, anyway.
Very good. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Anyone else got anything they want to share or ask? No? Must have some things. Okay, well, we're going to have a very quiet time if no one's got anything they want to share or say.
Well, Mike, I'll jump in there, but has God been showing you anything new and different lately, or things that you see potentially coming down the pike, just in terms of where this, if for lack of a better word, this whole stream can go? in a positive sense.
Yeah. I believe we're in a cycle, and that cycle revolves around the cycle of the Court of 70 and how the Court of 70 functions in judgment, justice, grace, and mercy. And so I believe we're in a cycle. I think in terms of what God is doing, there are people at all different stages on what God's doing. In terms of like the prophetic timetable, there are still so many people who've never heard an intimate call to God, to sonship or relationship, and they're still operating in the religious system. Well, God is still calling them. He's not giving up on them. He's still calling them to come into something deeper and more relevant to him and relationship-wise. There are those who are still embracing the removing of stumbling blocks and the gathering of lawlessness and things. So there are those that have begun to move from relationship into, now I have such a relationship that God can start to work on me. So the process of transformation is still going on for many, and he's still calling those to come out of the, well, I love soaking in the presence of God, into, this is going to bring transformation to my life. And there are those there now that are experiencing the judgment of God, in God's judgment, in passing verdict over whether we're aligned with heaven or not, and therefore change and transformation needs to take place of our structures as well as our individual lives. Am I open to God to pass verdict on my life? Well, if I'm praying, search me, O God, and know my heart, then I must be really willing for him to pass that judgment and show me, so that I can actually accept that and cross over into life and receive change as a result of embracing those things. So I think we're in that process, that last year the cycle of judgment ended for this period, and the verdict was passed, and God wants to see justice. So now we're in a period where justice is going to be delivered for those who have heard the verdict, and for those who the verdict is passed on. And justice is just an outworking of the verdict. So we want to see change take place as a result of justice. So we're in that place where we're in preparation for what's coming. And therefore, for me, the key right now is to establish the Joshua generation, to establish the mentors, to be ready, so that we're able to receive the blueprints for embassies of heaven, start establishing on the earth. We must be a place that starts to draw people out of the wilderness. So for me, those that have crossed over as a forerunner, like Joshua and Caleb who spied out the land, must start calling others to cross. Therefore, proactively looking to give a good report and encourage people. You know, and I think that's the season where a lot of activity needs to take place. We must see people drawn out of the wilderness, but there are those who will start to establish the foundations of the storehouses ready for a harvest that's coming. I mean, the harvest is going to come out of the world, not out of the church. You know, so the harvest is going to come out of the world. That which comes out of the church is going to be the Joshua generation. And so we must be ready for both. So for me, there's a dual parallel process, and some people will be more called to engage with the existing church structure and to start legislating and administrating for the release of people from the coverings of men. You know, and there are things in heaven, there are the ordinances of heaven, which are light, piercing light, thunderbolts, which are lightning bolts, things that will need to penetrate the darkness of the coverings that have been placed over people, keeping them from their full inheritance. And we need to start releasing that. There needs to be Emmaus roads encounters. There will be the passing of the Moses generation who don't want to cross. So those of that who are seen very much in the Moses role of doing the miracles and being the leaders on top of the mountains and engaging God that way, they got a choice: cross over or die in the wilderness like Moses did. And so I see people going to pass who fail to respond. And I think you'll see that over the next years. More and more of that generation will pass unnecessarily, but they will if they don't choose to embrace. Now, my desire is to call out to them, send angels to them, send visitations to them. I mean, do whatever I can to get them to cross, because they're great people. Then we have to learn how to legislate so that we can establish the correct foundations for the cities of refuge or embassies of heaven, whatever you want to call them, ready for the harvest. But without the Joshua generation, there won't be the mentors. So we need more and more people to take their responsibility as sons and embrace preparing things for people to come. And I know many of you are involved in that. And I think for those out there who aren't, start considering asking God for a blueprint and mandate for something in your area. If you have nothing that's embracing what God is doing in these days. Because someone has to say, "Here am I, send me." And if no one says it, they'll all be waiting for what they consider the leaders of this movement to do it. And actually, the leaders aren't going to do it, because most of them are not pioneering, they're exploring, and they're not actually establishing much on the ground, which is why God is calling out for those to come and get a blueprint to establish something, so that we have cities of refuge or embassies of heaven in every place, every region, every city, every area, so the harvest can come in. It will be a sad thing if people have to travel 100 miles to go to a place of harvest. There should be a place within, certainly within the spheres of where the everlasting doors are, and the connections of those things on the earth, to establish those things, places, to be ready. So I think that's where we are. I think we're needing to see justice done, which is a removal for me of the mantles of authority of the old order, so that can be released to the new order, and we need to prepare for grace. And grace is going to come in greater measure than ever before, but it's not going to come on the old order. God will not release his enabling power on something that he does not recognize as being a reflection of heaven. Therefore, what I do see is more and more control and earthly governmental structures trying to be exerting control, because they have true authority removed from them and they're operating in the soul. I see more and more of that taking place. Therefore, potentially more conflict and more persecution for those who are embracing something new. That's no different than has ever happened, but we mustn't be fazed by it. We just must not be affected by it. I see that happening. God has also said that within any cycle, those that can legislate a cycle within a cycle within a cycle. So we're in a cycle of judgment. I don't know how long that's going to last. We're not talking about like a year for each one of these things. 2015 was the end of a 40-year period, and that was the culmination of the judgment of the old generation in a actual physical time perspective. We're now in this place where judgment is going to be released. I don't think that judgment is going to happen in 1 year. But that does not stop grace being released, even when we're in a time overall picture of judgment, because we can see cycles of judgment, grace, and mercy within each cycle. So we may need to recognize, and this is where the sons of Issachar, understanding of the times and the seasons and being aware of what to do, will call for a season of grace or a season of mercy or a season of judgment or a season of justice, irrespective of what actual overall time we're in. And that will be an understanding and a wisdom that needs to be a heavenly governmental perspective, not an earthly reaction to things that are happening. You know, whatever we do, we must come from heaven's perspective and not react to an earthly one in an earthly way. And that means a much more proactive approach to things rather than a reactive approach to one. We need to establish government, and we need to establish places where heaven's government is operating and not subject to earthly government. And that means we have to learn to rule, to frame things, to cultivate desire for things, to begin to administrate the government of God's kingdom on earth as is in heaven more and more effectively. It starts in our lives. You know, I mean, I challenged our benches recently to what level of authority are they operating in, because it's going to be proportional to the level that they're operating in their own lives. And you can't expect to have a authority on a mountain with somebody else if you haven't got that authority in your own life. You know, and so some people get caught up in the corporate sense of the things that they're doing and therefore neglect the personal side of it. We must never neglect our personal relationship and governmental role just because we may be busy doing other things. We must balance it correctly. So the relationship and the responsibility must be balanced correctly, which means making sure that in our own lives our relationship with God is growing and maturing, and we're learning from that perspective to then do what we do in the other perspectives. Otherwise, people will put a focus on that which people can see and ignore that which they think people can't see, and that won't last long in this environment, because things will come to the light because we are beginning to radiate greater light, and people's darkness will not be able to hide within that light. So it's a real encouragement to embrace the process, you know, to embrace the soaking room of preparation, you know, to embrace the dark cloud, to proactively seek it, you know, not being just reactive, but actually, no, God, I want you to change me today. Remove the hindrances and the entanglements and the obstacles that are stopping me fulfilling who I am and my destiny, you know, rather than, you know, just trying to get on with it without actually it being realizing that we're in that process. So, you know, that would be some of my perspective on where we are. And of course, you know, within, you know, I think at the, and this is always difficult, because there are always going to be those who are at the edge of something because they're forerunners. There are, someone has to cross over first into something. You know, we don't all go in together. That's not the way it can work. So somebody has to be at the point where, okay, where are we? I think that those at the cutting edge of what God is doing are at the point of accepting his judgment and therefore embracing justice. That would be where I would see people are. And until we fully engage that and then embrace our governmental positions, then we're not going to see the next part of the God's timetable, which is, you know, a harvest, you know, of harvesters. You know, there will be no harvest of harvesters unless we have effectively accepted justice, and that means things have to change. The old systems are not going to be receiving a harvest, so we must establish new ones, and to that we must recognize what the judgment was against the old and repent and renounce that and begin to engage and do something from a new perspective. You know, and I think that's where people are. You know, and I think without doing that, you can have the most amazing revelations of other things, but if it does not affect what we're doing on the earth and it does not bring us into a better place for the harvest, then I don't really think it's much value. And those things which take your eyes off the earth and put them out somewhere else are things which are a distraction to what God is calling us to do. We're supposedly involved in the restoration of all things. We are called to be fruitful, to multiply, to fill, subdue, and to rule. That is our mandate. And if we don't do this in this planet, it doesn't matter a jot what other planets or anything else that's out there, because we'll never have the ability to go beyond what we're doing here. So we must get this place put back into its right position, perspective, and see the restoration of all things. So I don't see out there, whatever you call this, whether you call it a stream or a move or something that God's doing, I don't see enough emphasis on being ready, preparing for a harvest. I see too much emphasis on exploring new things without having ever put the last things into place or have them as foundations that actually you can live and build in. And that's why, you don't. There's no point in having more revelation if you've not put the last revelation in place. So for me, the last revelation, the last major revelatory thing was the order of Melchizedek. And we need to have that fully in place and functioning before we need to be concerned with being luminaries and lights and other things out there. We need to make sure that we have the order of Melchizedek operating, representing the four faces on earth as it is in heaven. That to me is the key of what we should be focusing on right now. Other things will end up being a distraction to that. They may be very interesting, but actually we're not doing what that orders us to do and gives us authority to do, which is to establish heaven on the earth. So that would be my analysis of our current situation.
One other quick question. You were talking about, you told us a story before about the whole thing that happened on the Good Friday service where there had been a dragon over your area and you had known about it for years, but on Good Friday, God finally gave you the permission to go ahead and take the dragon down. And I think you made a comment one time that things got a whole lot worse when the dragon came down. I mean, it wasn't this rosy, happy ever after ending that, the dragon is gone and, everything is sunshine and lollipops. Because things that were hidden became exposed. Things came out into the open. Can you just sort of give like just a brief thumbnail of what happened? Only because the first thing when I'm going to get ready to start teaching at church, the first thing that I'm going to be talking about is relationship and responsibility. And I wanted to use that as a capsule summary of someone who knew what to do, had the authority to do it, but waited until they had the permission to do it. That you just don't run in and jump in just because you see something and you know how to handle it. You have to wait for the permission and then to say, because here was the offshoot of what came after it. It wasn't necessarily what you would think it might be. And just to give people, to help people to understand that, yes, operating in the heavenly realms is wonderful, and we do have authority, but you still have to stay under the guideline of God that if He doesn't give you permission to do something, you don't touch it. You don't worry about it because His timing is there. So I was just wondering if you could just give me a brief capsule summary that I can share with people to say, okay, Mike finally had the permission, the dragon came down, but the immediate result was not necessarily what you would think it would be, and you have to be prepared to be able to handle that side of the coin.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, in that scenario, I have been here for the last 22 years, so I have built up a place of authority in invested being here. I have had roles of authority in the area with leadership. I've promoted unity amongst leaders, all that 20 years. Worked through stuff. Got disillusioned at times, and this is hard work, but continued. I have very good relationship with people that I've established over those years. So I have in a sense, a place to be able to talk and share and to be in relationship with people. I'm part of the Churches Together in our area. I was chairman of that for 5 years. I'm now still part of the Enabling Group, which is the group that sort of organizes things and really talks about vision and stuff like that for the area. So I'm involved in it. I'm not doing it from the outside. And so I get involved in the things we do locally, even if I don't necessarily personally find that that's my cup of tea or my flavor of things. And as a church, we don't do things like other churches do, because we don't pray like other churches do. We engage heaven. We do things very differently. And so we don't always get involved in everything that's going on locally, simply because people would find it very difficult to participate in a prayer meeting that is, oh God, will you do something, and please will you do this, and please will you do that. So there are things that we know that are going on. We don't make any comment towards, are not negative towards, but we certainly don't advertise and we don't promote it, because we know it's an old perspective. But we respect that that's where people are on their journey, and actually what they're doing is where they are on their journey, and that's fine, but actually it's not where we are. So we have a situation there, which is, that's how things are. When I in 2010, when I engaged in the fast, everyone locally was aware of what I was doing. So all the local leaders knew what I was doing. They were aware of it. When I came out of the fast, I didn't share with anybody anything. I waited until they asked. Because I wasn't going to just, I'd seen in a vision that we would sit together and we would begin to talk and we would begin to share. So I just waited for that to happen. They started asking, I started sharing. Then some of them actually said, actually, we'd like you, can you teach us this? Can we get together, regularly? Can you help us do this? And most of them were quite enthusiastic at that point. And then, so I did. We started, for about 6 or 7 weeks, I think, I got together with a group every week, and we began to explore, and we did activations, and we looked at some of the things, and and things were moving forward in that area. And then we then started to corporately, okay, what is God saying to us? And we spent some time then saying, okay, let's get to know each other better. Some of us know each other really well, some don't. So we started to engage relationally, started to build all that up. And that was something which was ongoing. And then we got to the point where God wanted it to go to another level. And that's where the rubber hit the road. Because a number of people were open to pursue and look at it. Some of them dropped out because it was too much discipline and hard work. You don't change and embrace something new without putting in the training your senses to do something different. Of course, leaders are very busy doing a lot of things, and therefore something really has to get hold of them if they're going to change the priorities of their lives. They were willing to set aside a few hours a week for a couple of months. But most of them did not develop that on into a lifestyle. 1 or 2 of them did. And I began to, after I finished the 2 months engaging with them, I began to meet with those that did. And there were a couple of them. And we began to seek God and engage heaven together. The others started to drift away from that perspective. We had a gathering, a day gathering, where the whole agenda was to engage God for an understanding of his call to come into intimacy. And we did that. And it was a positive day, but that was the turning point, because those that didn't want to pursue this into where God was calling them to go in intimacy ended up backing right off. And it was at that point, it was actually in May, and that gathering was in June, when I dealt with the white dragon. I saw it a couple of years before. It was circling around. Several other people actually also had visions of dragon. You know, there was not just me, you know, but I very clearly saw what it was. In terms of the white dragon, often that's a religious thing that tries to put a religious veil on something and have a authority which is coming through a religious perspective. And so eventually, you know, having our, you know, Good Friday, we stood with crosses, you know, and just stood in silence. You know, it was a very powerful thing. And I saw these angels heralding. I saw the white dragon, and God said, now you have the right to remove its head. You know, and so I removed it, released from it the scrolls that were for the blueprint for the area, and then essentially what happened was that religious veil that people were operating in essentially was removed, and now there had to be a degree of openness and honesty and transparency, which was not what some people wanted to do. And various things happened in terms of people started to make excuses using other things, but the enemy picked them off, drew them away, and some of them outright basically took a perspective on, we're not going this route. And one of the reasons for one of the churches not doing that was, well, if we go down this route, we employ a lot of people. What if people stop giving, and we wouldn't be able to carry on employing people? Therefore, this is too hard, too much of a risk. That was their attitude, you know. So what happened was we started to see where people really were, and I kept quiet totally during that period. I didn't talk about what was going on. I kept meeting for 12 months with 2 others, and we formed a bench of 3 for our area to engage in a blueprint. What was God calling for us to do as a blueprint for this area, to establish a city of refuge in this area? What would it be like? We engaged that. I said nothing. None of us said anything. And then we met, you know, and I met together every month with these guys, you know, for a morning. And in that morning, I saw 7 angels with 7 scrolls. One of the other guys saw also 7 thrones where these angels were stood behind. And someone who wasn't involved with us, who's very prophetic, said, I believe God said, asked this, what is your plan for the area? And that was, so then that very morning, God said to me, you now have a mandate to speak. So I took the mandate to speak, and I actually said, well, 3 of us have been engaging heaven for the last 12 months, and we have received a blueprint which actually reveals what God's plan is for this area. And we have here 7 angels that have been with us the last 2 times we've gathered, and those 7 angels have 7 scrolls, which are the 7 spheres of government that we've been authorized to administrate in this area. And they were like, and there you had the sort of evangelical spirit kicked in, and a couple of, well, where's that in the Bible, and where's this, and this, you know, you had the whole defensiveness. Well, why have you been meeting God and you haven't included us in it? You know, and it was all the stuff sort of came to the surface. And it was just, you know, so I said, okay, that's fine. Do you want to pursue this any further? You don't have to. So they said, okay, well, can you write this all out for us so that we can all see it, and then we can actually then spend some time with God over it? So I said, yeah, sure. So I sent them a paper which had all the diagrams and all the scriptures and everything about government and everything in it, and that was it. You know, so I left it with them, and then we started then to come back, and then people's true colors came out, which was God giving them an opportunity to embrace this. they had all sorts of arguments, semantics. Well, what does this mean? Are we saying the same thing? Are you saying you can only do it from heaven? Are you saying that what I do in my relationship with God is wrong? No, I'm just saying that there is a more intimate way, and you all have access to heaven. And actually, if you're not operating from heaven, then you can't bring the kingdom onto the earth. So I mean, I wasn't holding back at this point, because I now had a mandate to speak. So I was just speaking the truth. This is where, and I made it very clear, whether you want to be involved in this blueprint or not, we are going to do it. You can be involved in it if you choose. You don't have to be, but we're going to do it irrespective of your involvement if you don't want to be. So, because this is something that we've received from heaven and we're going to fulfill it. So having that all come to the surface, then it's like, okay, who wants to be involved? And none of them wanted to be involved, other than the one guy who was of the other bench of three, and one of the other bench of three had moved away. So we then needed to establish, okay, we need to engage this. So we then started to engage with people in our church who were further along, I guess, in this process. And I shared, look, this is the blueprint that we've got for the area. Anyone feel that they resonate with this? So we then got together. Another person then was added to the bench of three to make a three. Then others came forward to be part of the 7 mountains in our area, and we now are beginning to start to engage that. None of that could have taken place without killing the dragon, but those that were then where the light was able to come in was, I guess, the next step. And it was an opportunity that God gave people, and then when they didn't want to take the responsibility, then he gave that opportunity to others, and others have embraced it. Now, I'm still in relationship with those people. I still meet with them. Fat met with them this week. I still would count them as friends. No problem whatsoever. I'm not offended by the fact that they don't want to embrace that. I mean, in some way saddened that they don't want to embrace their full inheritance, but that's up to them. I'll still continue to meet with them. There will be things that we do together. In fact, on Sunday we had our Pentecost service where most of the churches cancel all their Sunday services. We all come together. There was about 800, 900 people gathered in the Pannier Market in town. We worshipped together. It was great, in a sense. As far as it went, I was, seeking for an open heaven and for angels to come and engage with people. But there was a good atmosphere. We were together in worshiping God together, and God honors that. He comes. He always manifests his presence where people are gathered in his name. Will this go further? Yeah, it will. We will establish the blueprint for the area, and we'll outwork it, and we'll continue to encourage others to be part of it. But we're not going to debate or argue with them over it. We're just going to get on with it. And I will be part of that unless God tells me not to. When it was my time not to be chairman anymore, God told me very clearly to withdraw from the role of chairman, because I could not have done this in that role, because the earthly and the heavenly role needed to be different. And God very clearly spoke to me about that, because in that role you do carry a position, and I was not going to use that position and be accused of using that position to get over my point of view or to overemphasize it. I basically stepped down because God told me to. And then after that, then I was given permission to open my mouth and begin to then outwork this from a heavenly perspective and focus on seeing it then delivered onto the earth. So yeah, there's always seasons. There's times within those seasons we have to be sensitive to, and each step of the way I wanted to receive a mandate and be clear what I was called to do in any particular time. And sometimes that just meant I was quiet, and I could have said things so many times, but I chose to accept the mandate was for us to be quiet right now until God said, now you can speak. You know, and that is so important, that we hear God and we don't react to circumstances and situations out of frustration, anger, annoyance, you know, even out of compassion. We must be motivated by love, and love is a demonstration of God's kingdom, and that is a key when you're dealing with these things. Now, I know we'll have a city of refuge established in this area, and my desire and my heart would be that other churches and other leaders gather to it, but actually we may well have to engage people at grassroots, because those coverings that people have put on are hindering what God wants to do, and therefore God will have a strategy of reaching people, because it won't go through the leaders, because their coverings are hindering their people receiving the revelation that God wants to bring them. So he'll find another way, you know, and we'll seek God for a strategy of how to do that, but we'll be very open and honest about it. You know, we won't try and, you know, do it behind anyone's back or to try and undermine anyone's authority. We'll be very clear when we do something public, when we actually begin to share that blueprint publicly. We will be very clear to share to all those leaders, we're going to do this, and we're going to invite everybody that God says to come, whether they're in your churches or not, and you're very welcome to come, but we are going to do this. You know, when we're given the right time and mandate, because I know I have the mandate, I just that we haven't got the time. The time isn't yet, but we have a mandate to go public and to begin to engage. But also, we also have a mandate to produce material which would reach out to the more traditional sectors, to engage them supernaturally and spiritually in these things. And one of the other guys who's part of the bench, he has a call to do that, and he's gifted in it, and he's producing materials which bridge the gap between what I could do and what those people would receive in a way that's open for more traditional churches. And I believe that may well be of something which will be of use in many different places in the future, as a bridge and a stepping stone into something new. You know, because I just think I'm just too far away from where I used to be to relate to and be able to relate to that group, whereas, you know, my friend is actually part of that, you know, and he's able to communicate, both because he has authority from within it, but also he has God's given him the gift to be able to do it as well, and he's doing some really good stuff, and he's, you know, preparing some resources to enable us to do that. So yeah, if that sort of sums it up a little bit.
Hey, Mike, this is Andra.
Oh, yeah.
Will we have access to those resources?
Maybe, you know, I would hope so. I mean, some of it, you know, it's not my resource. so you know, but I'm sure together I'm sure we will find. He's part of the Engaging God program, so, you know, his heart will be to, you know, use that for the wider kingdom. So I'm sure potentially that might be the case. Yeah. But I can't speak for him right now. But
okay. Well, just keep us posted. That would be something I'm interested in.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, he has done 5 or 6 sessions that he did publicly, and I think they had them on their website for a while, that were sort of using sort of video, PowerPoint interaction, using PowerPoint mix, and they were really good. You know, they were really helpful to help people understand the science that's going on, and the whole how science and what God is doing actually don't conflict, and sort of how the body, soul, and the spirit, and how, you know, our interaction with the spiritual realm. I mean, it came from a very in a sense, using non-threatening language and trying to bridge that gap, and I thought he did it really well. And he's actually spending some time going to sort of tune those resources, I think. And you know, he talked about the imagination and things, and he also related it to church history, in which these things have always been there. And you know, when you're in a more traditional church, you often have, you know, they often have in the past people that they hold in high respect, who then would have probably been classed as pretty much weird and rebels. You know, the sort of mystic, you know, Teresa of Avila and people like that, that are now actually, oh wow, Teresa. Well, actually, when you actually go and look at the stuff and what she was doing, it's like pretty out there. You know, it's like she wouldn't feel uncomfortable if she gathered in our gatherings. That's for sure. You know, and there are those right throughout church history that, you know, God has, you know, had forerunners all the way through, and they just call them saints. You know, they call them saints. You know, I mean, St. Francis. You know, oh wow, yeah, the patron saint of animals. I mean, man, he did some really interesting stuff. You know, supernatural stuff, and so people put a interesting slant on the saints of old, not really understanding anything of the supernatural dimension of life that they lived in. So, you know, the more traditional church, like the Church of England in art, they're more open to angelic involvement than a lot of more Pentecostal type churches, because it's part of their liturgy. They expect angels to be looking and involved. So sometimes that helps, you know. It helps sort of an engagement. So, yeah. Anyway. All right. Okay. Well, we'll leave it there.